same way we should be able to put certain validations. So like we do have a determination, same way we'll be able to put the validations. The keywords is very simple. All we have to do is, if I just go back over here, here you will say, I want to create a validation. Okay, you will say validation over here. And now what you want to validate, that's something you can name it as. So any meaningful name which gives you the purpose, or I can say which gives the application the purpose, what should happen, that will become the name of the validation. So for example, I'll just say validate mandatory fields. So that's what you would be recalling, that maybe in a couple of days back I specified, when you say read only, definitely it would make those fields read only. But when you say mandatory, the system won't automatically make those fields mandatory. All it would do is it would just put the asterisk sign. But the validation message, the actually validation implementation that should be done, those are responsibility of that particular person. And that's where you cannot omit out from there. Otherwise, your system won't be able to validate the data fields that you are marking as a mandatory one. Okay. Now, as you can see, if I just press Control space over here, you will see that going forward, SAP has changed the way validation can be done. So maybe you would be remembering in BOF that we were having different life cycle on which I can validate the information. But in case of a RAP, you will only be able to do all the kind of validation on save. Whenever a user is done editing whatever information he wants, and once he is trying to save those information explicitly, only at that point in time, any sort of validation, be it for the mandatory data, be it for any sort of validating of data. For example, if I am saying I do have a currency code USD and someone is passing by mistake called BYSD, okay, even at the time of passing, he won't get any error. But if you do have validation in place, then while he try to save those information, only the validation will come into picture. Here you can also specify, like we did in the determination, like in what all phase you want the validation to happen. So for example, I can say I want the validation to happen in case of a create update. And for example, I don't want the validation to occur in delete, because in delete, definitely the record is altogether going to get deleted, right? So that's what I specified. Now post which, as you can see, you are getting a warning saying the validation mandatory is not, okay, let's just say validation is not assigned to any determine action. Okay, so that's one of the thing we'll be seeing in a minute. And validation is not implemented. So let's just do one thing. Let's just first try implementing this method. So I'll just put a cursor, click on this, and system is saying add mandatory method, add the method for validate mandatory as a part of the implementation. So I'll just click OK. And as you can see, the system generated very nice validate mandatory fields. And as you can observe in the signature as well, the system implemented a method called validate mandatory for the validation on the option of a save. So that's what the system does. Okay, now I'll just save this information and we'll try to activate both. Okay, another thing that you would be seeing over here is maybe in a minute we should again start getting a warning. That's very important. Okay, so as I mentioned, as per SAP's framework guideline, and that's where I guess RAP is also implementing on the same line, that when you are saying I want the validation to be performed on save of certain data, you definitely can specify on save over here. But when you are trying to save those data on click of a save, that might be too late for certain validation. So for example, if I have entered certain value and I want the validation to occur, in order for me to recognize whether that particular data or not. Okay, so definitely SAP has specifically specified that on change of any of the data, validation won't occur. Then when at what all lifecycle event the validation can get triggered? It can get triggered on save first, or if you see over here, we do have validate mandatory is not assigned to method prepare. So you have to specify it in to a draft determine action prepare, so that the validation will get triggered while your data is being prepared. So when I say while your data is being prepared, it means even though it's in draft mode, but you are specifically pressing enter to let the system know that you want this particular validation to get triggered. So here you can specify validation. As you can say, in the control space, you will always get this. Whatever validation has been created, be it in the parent or the child, anywhere you have created any sort of validation, you will get the list. So in any scope of the particular BO, be it parent or child, you have created a validation, you have to specify that particular validation in prepare method if you want that validation to also get triggered on click of the enter on the browser. Okay, so that's what you can see. So if I just activate this, now you will have a very nice method which ideally validates the data. Okay, so now if I just go back to the method over here, you would see that I am somewhere in the validation method over here. So let's just try to go through that, like what all information it contains. So I'll just simply go over here and just say web element info. Okay, as you can see, I'll just put the cursor over here and it says that I will get certain key parameter as an input. Based on the key, now you know how I can derive the data by using the EML statement. And then in case any of the validation that you are trying to put is failing, then definitely you can pass the failed parameter. Now, this is something we also discussed yesterday. Failed parameter will allow you passing the key parameter of any of the failure, whereas reported parameter will allow you passing the relevant messages. Okay, so these two will work in conjunction with each other in order for you to report any method, report any sort of a messages. Okay, so now I want to validate the mandatory field. So how can I go with it? So my first and foremost thing should be that whatever fields I want to validate, I want the first data of it, then only I'll be able to validate. Otherwise, my system won't be able to recognize that whether it has got any data which was required or it's still blank. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll try to read the travel information. For that, what you will do is you will simply say read entities of, and here you would read the root entity. So I'll just simply say this. Again, you would say in local mode. Then you would specify the entity that you want. So in my case, we want the travel, right? So let me just keep this somewhere in the center so it's more readable. Okay. Now we'll say read entities of this entity travel. And now what I want is I want to read all fields with particular key I am passing. So I'll just say with corresponding key. Okay. And we want to read the result data LT travel info, or I can say LT travel data. And in case there is any issue while reading the data itself, definitely we can also report those. So that's why you can say LT reported. And in case if there are any failures, we can also get the failed data. Okay. So this is what you can do. You can definitely get the information while you are, while your user is clicking on save over here, and you will get the control over here. Our next step will be definitely to populate the message so as to populate the error message, and your screen will get highlighted with those messages. That will be a second step. So before that, let's just try seeing how we can do that. I'll just remove the breakpoints where we don't need. So for example, these were the breakpoints and we don't need those. So I'll just remove those. Instead, I'll just simply put the breakpoint on the validation. Okay. So I'll just go over here, and as you can see, I'm over here. I'll just try creating a record. Okay, so it's getting the breakpoint, I guess, in the early numbering. This is what we don't want. So I'll just execute that. As you can see, we are having a number getting generated. Definitely during this particular point in time, you have not seen any sort of validation getting triggered. Now, as I mentioned, validation will get triggered once you click on create, right? So definitely you can go ahead and try clicking on create. Before that, let's just pass certain information. So I'll just say 2023 0, or I can say 26 day today's date. And I'll just say 2023-26. So it updated this draft, but it did not trigger any validation. So if, during the time of change, your system won't trigger any validation because system don't know whether we have already touched upon these fields or these fields are still yet to be worked, right? So if you start throwing the errors, then it would be quite irritating for the end user. Then that's where we won't get any validation even without if the user is not explicitly asking for those. Okay. So now I'll just say, for example, let's just try out the first scenario when I say create. The moment you start creating this, as you can see, system is going into wait mode. So if I just go over here, I am getting the breakpoint at my validation. So now my validation just got triggered, right? So I'll just simply say F6 to read out the information, whatever it, whatever are there. And here, I guess we should have some sort of a section for variable. Let's not, let's just say Windows show view variables. Okay, so we do have the variables over here, and here I can see that in the locals, I should be able to read out some data which says that, yeah, my travel data is being read, and here I do have the information which says, yeah, it's a 01. It means it's in the draft mode. Travel ID and everything I'm getting, but I'm not getting begin date and end date. So these are the two candidates which definitely needs an error message on my output if I am not having any sort of values coming as a part of that, right? So what I might be doing as a part of a normal developer, I would definitely add some sort of a error message saying, okay, these are the information which I was expecting, but I am not getting those information being populated. So definitely these are the two clear candidates for the error, right? So what I'll do is I'll just simply go over here and I'll just say that I want a particular record to fail. So I'll simply say if what all fields I am trying to put an eye on. Okay. So I am trying to put my eye on a certain field, but if you see, I do have my travel data as well. So I'll just simply say loop at my LT travel data. Okay. So whenever you are looping on the travel data, what's the purpose? Yeah, the main purpose is that you want that if you are getting more than one information as well, all those information should get validated at the same time. So I'll just say loop at travel data into data ls travel data. So I can get the single record out of that. And now my validation, I can say validate mandatory fields. So what all fields are mandatory for me? So I'll just say if my ls travel data dash, which one is mandatory for me? So I'll just say for me, definitely the agency ID is mandatory, is initial. I can say or my customer ID is also mandatory for us, right? Or I can say begin date is also mandatory for me. Or I can say if my ls travel data end date is also mandatory for me. So if any of this is mandatory, then I want to do something. Still, till now, we have just validated. We have not filled any sort of failed and reported parameters. So definitely system won't give any sort of issues. Okay. So I can simply go ahead and format my code. So this is something that we just added. Okay. Now our purpose is to fill the fail parameter in case any of these messages are failing. So our first step, I can say step number one, fill failed parameter in case of error. So fail parameter, what it would contain? Fail parameter will always contain the key of it. Okay. So what is something that we are trying to fail? So I'll just say fail dash. Here, as you can see, you are saying whether you want to make the travel fail or make the booking fail. So I'll just say make the travel fail because travel information is missing. Perfect. So I'll just say fail travel value hash over here. And what I'll fill over here is here I am trying to if, travel is a table, right? So I if you are not very clear what it is, simply put a cursor on this, you will get the all information. It says type response for this. So these are structure. It says type table for this. So it's a table, right? So in the table, if it's a table, if I want to add a record, what I'll add? I'll add one more round bracket. I'll just say derived type. So what all information it contains? So it contains all the information as in what is prone to fail. So here you will get all the information out of which you have to, the bare minimum thing is something that you are supposed to pass. Okay, that's more than sufficient for the system to raise any error message. So what is that bare minimum thing? That's nothing but the component group called percentage TKY. So this percentage TKY is something which ideally gives you an opportunity to raise an error message for that particular error, for that particular record. So percentage TKY is a combined key which contains all the information how I can uniquely identify a record. So as you can see, it contains whether my record is in the draft, what is the travel ID it is associated with. So this is the bare minimum thing which ideally a record would need in order for it to be identified uniquely, right? So that's what we are doing. So I'll just say ls travel data, and here I'll just say percentage TKY. So you are filling the information of that particular key parameter, which says that which particular record is having some issue. Your another step should be that you should be specifying a message in case I can say specify a message if any of the information is missing. Okay, so what would be your first step? So let's just start with one. Okay, let's just start with, for example, a begin date. So I'll just say if my ls travel data. So definitely, if we are in this clause, definitely it means that at least one of the parameter is missing, right? So I'll just say if my ls travel data dash begin date is initial, then we want that this particular field should get some error. Okay, so in that particular case, we have to specify the relevant message in some sort of a parameter called reported. So here as well, like we had failed, same way we would have reported. And what particular parameter we want to report on? So I'll just say travel. I want to report on the travel, that this particular parameter has some issue. So I'll just say value hash over here, and we'll start filling the information of that relevant message. Okay, so this will be a first step. So I can say second step in reporting any error message. So like we are supposed to uniquely identify a record while we are making it fail, same way we are also required to specify a uniqueness of the record while we are making it report a particular message. So as you can see in this particular parameter, we have the same parameter which uniquely identifies a record, percentage TKY. Okay, so that's the same thing we will be doing. So I'll add one more record over here, and here I'll simply say that percentage TKY equal to my ls travel data percentage TKY. Okay. Another thing we would need, a very important one, is that which particular element we want to highlight with an error. So that's something that would also come into picture. So I'll just say percentage element. Now, what is the purpose of this particular parameter? The purpose of this parameter is to highlight that particular error message on that field itself. So it would be easy for my user to recognize that this particular field has an error. So as you can see, I am saying reported percentage element, and here I'll specify definitely the field which is begin date. So I'll just go over here and I'll just say begin date, that there is a parameter which is having an issue. Now, you remember there was an interface which says on and off. So that's the same interface we'll be using. So rather than going with any hard coded one. So I'll just say I have ABAP behavior. Okay, and it has a constant for MK and on and off. So this would ultimately makes that field to highlight that this is a field which is having an error. Another one very important parameter over here is called a actual message. Like what is the error message that you want to give? So I'll just simply say message. Okay, and here you would be specifying a message, and for that there is a method called new message that you can definitely go ahead with. So here I'll just specify a new message. And it would be new underscore message. Sorry, it's not a new message. And here you have to specify. Okay, just a sec. Okay, yeah. So you have to pass the all the parameters. So now this particular message is a method which has all the couple of parameters that you have to specify. Okay, so one of those will be the ID of that particular message, like what will be the message ID. So definitely we'll have the message class that we can rely on, right? So I'll just go over here and I'll just simply say message class. So for example, if I start searching for a message class for system, so here as you can see, I do have message class for system. That's something I can use. If you want, you can also create your own message class. But for example, if you are willing to pass a fixed message from your program itself, you can rely on the message of the system class. So for example, here I do have a 02 message class, which is having an end. Okay, and it means that you can pass a single parameter based message over here. So that's something we can also pass. Okay, so I'll just say ID over here, and here I'll just simply say sign. Okay, and here you would pass number, like which particular number of the message it is. So I'll just say 002 because it's the second number of message. If that's a parameter that you want to pass, definitely you can go ahead and pass the I can say parameters as well in the V1, V2, V3, V4. So for example, it is currently a begin date. So I'll just say begin date is mandatory, or let's just make it more non-technical. So I'll just say is required, right? You can do that. And then you can define like whether it's a error message or a success or a warning or what it is. So you can define something called severity as well. And here you would be specifying that my particular, again, there is a constant interface that would help you derive those information. So I'll just say if abap EHV, and there would be something for message. Okay, so at the behavior level, you will find all the message, all the relevant interface. So for example, if you say BEHV, you will see all of the one that you can definitely use. So I'll go with the message over here. And here I would specify that these are error message for me. So this is something that I won't need. So if you see, these are the bare minimum parameters. That's something that we are supposed to specify while we are going with any sort of a reporting. First step will be a fail parameter, which points out the error record where actually say there is some error. Another one will be the message which you want to populate on that particular field. Okay. Still, there are a few things that needs to be implemented, but let's just learn those during the execution cycle itself. Okay, so I'll just stop the debugger. We had that open just to look at the data parallelly, so it would be easy for us to write the code. I'll just close this and I'll just activate this. Okay, so now I'll just go over here and I guess, yeah, definitely we had quite a long time since the record was waiting. So let's just start from the circle one. I'll just discard the draft over here. Okay, so I'll just go over here and now let's just try creating this. So as you can see, thanks to early numbering, the number is getting generated. Now we do have the validation in place for all four of them. But yeah, we have just specified the message for one of them. So let's just start with one. Let's just try keeping the begin date as empty. Okay, so what we'll do is I'll just say 2023, 26, 2023, 26. Okay, but as we know, the validation will get triggered only in case of a save, that's the first, or in case you are explicitly pressing an enter. So for example, I'm specifying the end date as tomorrow. And now there are two ways. So let me just try pressing an enter. Okay, as you can see, the moment I press enter, a validation is getting triggered. So these are the two ways. In the behavior, definitely we specified on save, but just because we specified that particular validation as a part of draft determine action, it would also get triggered while you do have a particular enter pressed on that particular screen. So now if I just say F6, you would get this information in the travel data. If you want, you can also go in the variables and you can view the data at the same time. So I'll just go over here and we'll try to have the data at a glance. Okay. So I do have the data. Now, as you can see, my begin date is still empty. So I'll just go over here, F6. And if any of the information is blank, yeah, it is. So it will make my record to fail. So I'll just add the failed key. If my begin date is empty, yes, system says yes, it's an empty one. So I'll just execute this. If I just go back, you can see that there is a very nice error message popping up which says begin date is required. So on that particular field, you would see that the error message is popping up and you are getting an error message. Now this will be true going forward if you do have more than one error message as well. Okay, so if I just go over here, what you would have noticed is we are getting a error message highlighted over here, but we are still not in a mode of a state. So there is something called a state message. So as you can see, these are the message, but these are not state message. So state messages are something that ideally gives the state of that particular record, saying whether the state of this record is a fully validated or it's uh, a record which is having some sort of a error, okay, or some sort of a warning. That's what a state of a message says. So when you say state of a message, that's where the state messages will come into picture. Okay, so I'll just close this. And here what you would recognize is that if I just go over here, okay, so when you go over here, you would say that in the percentage TKY itself, that we do have an opportunity to separate out the messages. Why is that the case? Because as we specify over here that I can raise a error message if its begin date is empty or end date is empty or any of the issue is there with any of the mandatory field we specified. Same way, for example, I want to specify the error message for, let's just say, REST 3 parameters. So I'll just specify it for begin date, end date, agency ID, and over here I'll just go back. So I want to validate whether my end date is having some issue. Here, definitely the field we want to get highlighted in that case will be end date, and we want to specify that end date is required. We can change the relevant message over here, definitely. And if you want, you can omit passing the mandate, I can say the parameters as a part of the message. You can define your own message class, define your own message, use that. That's also totally fine. Like we used to do in normal ABAP. Same way you can do it over here as well. Now I want to validate the agency ID. So I'll just say whether agency ID is there or not. So I'll just pass those information and I'll just say that if agency ID is also initial, agency ID is required. And I can also validate whether my customer ID is there or not. So I can simply go ahead and pass my customer ID as well. I'll just pass it over here. Okay, and here I'll just say that my customer ID is also required. Okay, but these are the information which are being highlighted, but this still does not depict the state of a particular record. Okay. So if I just go over here and I'll just simply activate this. Okay. And now if I just go back to my browser and here, for example, let me just remove all this information and let's just press enter. As you can see, system is going back and executing everything. First, it would validate the begin date. Okay, so maybe I guess one thing that we have missed is it would only still get the messages cleared because we have not retained all the message. We are just going with new syntax, but we have to specify the base as well. And that's where maybe it will only pop up the error message on the customer ID. Yeah. So here, I guess that's particular error message. Those are getting popped up. But what we have to specify over here initially is that we want the error message to be persisted. And that's where what you have to specify over here is that whatever data that was there already in the travel, please persist those. And that's where you would specify as my base, right? Because otherwise what would happen is if it's validating the end date, it would forget about the begin date. Okay, so I'll just go over here and I'll just say, I want to validate this. And this information is something that would be persisted. So if there is any issue with the begin date, it will have an error message. And after that, if there is any issue with the end date, it will have an error message, but it won't clear out the error message that was already raised for the end date. So likewise, it would go ahead with that. Now, when we are talking about something called a state messages, okay, so before that, let's just activate this and let's just try to go ahead over here and try pressing enter. As you can see now on all four field, we do have an error message saying that these fields are mandatory. So these, because we are persisting the, we uh, we are not clearing out the error message that was raised in an earlier statement. Okay, but the issue is that user will get the fields highlighted, but he won't have any navigation. For example, consider there is a very big screen and where we do have n number of fields, how the system user will be able to navigate to that relevant field. Okay. So in that case, what you can do is you can simply go ahead over here in the code and you can introduce one more parameter called a state area. So in all the messages, you can specify one more additional parameter called a state area, which defines the state, like what kind of a message it is. You can kind of categorize your message. So I'll just say this something validate begin date. This is what you can call it as. Okay. Then you can, for example, define another state area over here where you are defining the validation for a end date. Another information you are specifying over here where you are specifying a validation on my agency ID. And here you are specifying a validation on my customer ID, for example. So in this case, what the system would do is it would persist the state of your record, and that's why it is called a state messages. So what would be the change in the behavior? That's where what we'll be seeing in a minute. So along with each of the record, you can make categorization of that record. Now, what is the purpose of that? Consider that there is only one record, then definitely this message makes sense. The begin date is required. But consider that I do have validation saying starting date should be before the ending date, correct? Then in that case, definitely I can expect one more error coming on either of them or both of them. So in that case, or let's just say agency ID is required, that's true. Or let's just say there can be some combination which are not allowed. Okay, so definitely there are pretty good chances that you might end up getting more than one error message on a field. So if the field is only getting highlighted, how would you ensure that you are getting more than one error message? Okay, that's where you might need a help from the state messages, that in a single state message, whatever validation you are putting on the agency ID, you can bind all those messages in a single state area so that they'll always get grouped and you would get all those messages on the single field. Okay, that's the purpose of a state area. So I'll just go over here and I'll just simply say, let me just go back and let me just discard this for a while. Okay, so we do have a 4153 record. Let's just try creating a new one. Okay, so I do have a very nice information over here. Now let's just start with the very first example or experiment. Let's just press enter. You can definitely create. So validation will get triggered on click of a enter or on click of a create. I'll just execute this. As you can see now, along with the error message over here, you are also getting a message pop over here. Whatever error message you click on, the system will navigate you back to that particular field. For example, you are not sure, okay, what is the begin date because we have given a name or starting date over here. Definitely error message is not that elaborative. So what you can do is click on any error message here and you would be navigated to that relevant field. If you are saying end date, you would get this particular error message getting highlighted. If it's a big screen, you would get navigated over there as well. So that's the functionality of this particular state messages, which allows you giving a error message particular to that particular bind to a particular field that would help you easy navigation, and it would be easy for the end user also to recognize and resolve those errors very quickly. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages of state message as well. Consider you are having an agency ID which you specified. Now I'm entering an agency ID who is saying 2026, 23, and I'm saying 26. I'll just say, okay, I have entered this particular. On click of tab, definitely the error message won't be gone because the system won't revalidate it. When the system will revalidate, while you click on a create or a save, or while you click on the, you press enter. So the moment I press enter, you would see that a validation will again get triggered. Okay, so now I am in the execution again. I'll just execute this. But now, as you can see, number of error messages are now increased. Okay, and as you can also see that the error message that was there earlier is not gone. Instead, I am getting three more error messages. Agency ID, I am getting two on customer, two on begin date, and two on end date. On agency ID, I do have only one. Now, what does this signify? That the error messages are persisted somewhere. Definitely, it's a REST API, so it won't persist it in the database, or I can say it won't remember the state of your application's execution, but the state message will remember have some sort of a capability that it remembers the state of your application somewhere. Okay. So if you want that each time you are validating, there should be a fresh execution of validation that should start again. At that point in time, what you have to do is you have to ensure that along with the failed parameter that you are filling, if any of the error messages are there, before that as well, for each of the state messages, it's your responsibility that you clear out all the state messages. What it is called? It is called initialize your state area before even populating it. I'll just say initialize my state area. Okay, that's what you will be doing. And how the system would be able to, okay, what all things I have to pass in the system for that. So you have to pass, for example, a reported travel over here. Okay, and in this particular reported travel, again, you have to pass certain parameters. So the same parameter that we discussed, but as we are trying to clear the information out, we are not supposed to go with any field. Instead, we'll go with the information of only state area first, and we won't be passing any message as well. So here, while initializing the state area, you are required to pass the identity of the record. So for example, if I'm required to pass the identity of the record where it makes sense to be, I can say it makes more sense if I put it within the loop, because in the loop, I can expect that if I am getting a call from a REST API outside of the Fiori element, I might end up getting more than one record. So here you have to specify percentage TKY. Okay, and here you would specify this LS travel data and percentage TKY. Okay, this is one. Another one you have to specify over here is that particular state area for which you want to ensure that the new fresh error messages are being delivered. So I'll just say state area over here. And what would be the value? So in this case, you can expect that it should be a begin date, validate begin date. Okay, so same way you would be specifying this, and you can just simply copy this and edit 4 times, because we have 4 error messages that we want to clear the state area of. So you can ensure that 4 error messages are having the state area getting cleared. So I just go over here. Oh, sorry. Copy this. Copy. Okay. So what it would do is it would clear out the state area. Now, as we are filling some information before this, it's our responsibility to ensure that this information are persisted. So I'll just pass it over here like this. So it would persist the any information that we have already passed. So it's like you have to pass an empty line of a state area in order for the system to recognize that you're you are not expected to store any sort of a state messages. Whatever was before this, please clear out this and start from a clean slate. That's what you are trying to indicate to the system. So I'll just activate this. So if there are 4, there will be 4 entry into this. If there are 50, there will be 50. You can also create a method to clear the state area, as a part of which you can just pass 2 parameter. You can also create the single message reporting method. So these are the utilities that you can plan and create at your own as well. So this is not in the framework, just from a good design perspective. Okay, so I'll just go over here. Let's just start again, and I'll just go over here and we'll try to remove any breakpoint if you do have to see a real execution mode. So I'll just remove this breakpoint. Okay, I don't want any breakpoint, or let's just simply deactivate all the breakpoint. Okay. Now, I'll just say I want to create something. So I'll just create a record. Now I have not passed any of the information. Let me just press enter. Here, as you can see, it says that, okay, these 4 parameters are required. Okay, and now I am saying that, okay, I have passed 2023 26. I'll press an enter. And as you can see, the agency ID is validated. If I don't validate each and everything in a single execution cycle, I'll just say today, tomorrow. Earlier, this was Earlier, these fields were having an error, but as I specified this, so for example, now I'm not specifying the value for end date. Now I click on create. Then you would see that still I won't be able to create this because the last field end date is still not having the required information, and I'll be able to pass this in particular information, and then only this particular record will get created. If you want to get this validated beforehand, you can press enter, and this would work thanks to the prepare action that we have specified. Okay. So in the behavior, you would see that definitely on top of the on save validation, we have already specified this in the draft determine